Today on Bench Briefs, we're looking at a recent Supreme Court of Canada decision that puts the spotlight on how provincial government actions can impact our constitutional rights. In Taylor v. Newfoundland and Labrador, the highest court tackled a dispute that raises important questions about the limits of government power and the protection of individual freedoms under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So, what's the story here? Taylor, a resident of Newfoundland and Labrador, challenged for certain policies or legislation introduced by the provincial government. Taylor argued that these government actions infringed on constitutional rights guaranteed by the Charter. While the details of the specific policies weren't widely publicized, the case made its way through the courts because it raised fundamental questions about whether the province had overstepped its constitutional boundaries. At its core, this case is about a clash between individual rights and government authority. Taylor claimed that the government's conduct violated constitutional protections, but the government maintained that its actions were lawful and justified under the Constitution. The dispute eventually reached the Supreme Court of Canada, which had to decide two main issues. First, did the government's actions or legislation indeed violate any constitutional rights? And second, if there was a violation, what was the scope of that breach? And what remedies, if any, were appropriate to address it? These questions are critical because they go to the heart of how our constitutional framework balances individual freedoms against the powers of government. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees a range of protections, from freedom of expression and equality rights to legal rights and fundamental freedoms. But these rights are not absolute. Governments can sometimes justify limitations on rights if they meet certain legal tests. So, determining whether a government action crosses that line is often complex and fact specific. In Taylor's case, the Supreme Court had to carefully analyze the nature of the provincial policies and their impact on Taylor's rights. The court's decision, released in early 2026, clarified the extent to which provincial governments must respect constitutional protections when implementing policies, especially when those policies affect individual rights in significant ways. While the court acknowledged the government's role in managing public affairs, it emphasized that this role cannot come at the expense of fundamental constitutional guarantees. Why does this case matter beyond Taylor and Newfoundland and Labrador? It serves as an important reminder that charter rights apply to all levels of government, including provinces, and that individuals have the ability to challenge government actions that they believe infringe on their constitutional freedoms. The ruling reinforces the principle that governments must operate within constitutional limits and that courts have a vital role in upholding those limits. For lawyers, policymakers, and everyday Canadians alike, Taylor v. Newfoundland and Labrador highlights the ongoing dialogue between government authority and individual rights. It underscores the importance of constitutional scrutiny whenever government policies touch on protected freedoms. Moreover, it demonstrates the Supreme Court's continuing role in shaping how the Charter is applied across Canada's diverse provinces and territories. In the end, this case strengthens the framework that protects Canadians from unconstitutional government overreach, ensuring that rights enshrined in the Charter remain meaningful and enforceable. It also encourages governments to carefully consider the constitutional implications of their policies before acting. Thanks for listening to Bench Briefs. Be sure to join us next time for another deep dive into the cases that shape Canadian law and our everyday lives.